Representative Todd Achilles, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Fantastic, sir. I just found out you are a professor all over the country, which is awesome because I love teaching and apparently you love teaching. So go us.
I am. Yeah, I started about 8 years ago. I spent 20 plus years in the tech industry at T-Mobile, Hewlett Packard, a couple startups, and then kind of started the slow pivot back into public service. So starting with teaching public policy.
Good for you, man. I got turned on to what you were doing because I saw a video on the gram of you in front of a dumpster, like this dumpster fire with Todd Achilles. You were speaking out against, it was like HB1 or H joint resolution. I can't remember which one it is. Somebody made a resolution to like eliminate the education requirement from the state constitution of Idaho.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
So joint resolution 1, it's exactly that. It's to change the Constitution's definition of basically public education, where now it's a requirement that anyone between 6 and 18 is the state has a responsibility to make sure you're educated. And the edits are basically to say, we're going to scrap that and basically leave it up to the parents. And I think that's a profoundly bad idea. And hence the dumpster.
Yeah. And if I may point out too, the state has a responsibility to education if people come forward and want education. But the state, Idaho also has a very specific homeschooling option, which is like, look, you want to homeschool your kid, don't register them for private school, don't register for public. Nobody's coming to your house. Like if you don't educate your kids, if you want to unschool them, as the movement is called, the state is not going to stop you. So if you want your kids to not be able to read, not be able to write, you have the right as a parent in the state of Idaho to do that. And nobody's coming after you or going to say anything to you. But if you show up one day with a kid and you're like, hey, state, educate this kid. The state has an obligation under the Constitution right now to be like, okay, here you go. Like, let's get you into the programs, whatever we can do. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got more choice than probably any other state. If you don't like the public schools, great. We've got the charters. If you don't like the charters, great. You can homeschool. But to allow a kid to not be educated and not be able to function in society is a violation of that kid's fundamental rights. And that's, listen, in all things, there's tension in the policy, right? And you want that tension between, parental rights and the kid's rights and the role of the state and everything else. But this is to basically remove the state from the equation and leave kids exposed. And we know that 99% of parents are going to do the right thing and make sure their kids are functional. But man, that 1%. And I referenced the book Educated by Tara Westover, right? And her whole experience of living in a family that didn't believe in education and just what it took her to break through that. We can't let that happen to Idaho kids.
There are a couple things though, okay? Because it's not that we can't allow kids to not be educated. We can if that's what the Idaho parent wants, right? Like as of right now, the reality is that Idaho's position is, look, if you're a parent and you have a kid and you don't want them ever touching a book, you have that right in Idaho. But I think the distinction comes when it's, hey, if you're a parent and you want your kids integrated into education, we're going to change the law that says that's not my problem. That's a mistake. And whatever people feel about the homeschooling regulations is on them. That was not what this bill was about. This bill was about pushing the obligation and responsibility to education off of the state that's required to have schools. Be it there's a school district that I was looking at over I have a tech education education program for parents. So any school district that in the state of Idaho that distributes technology, we have this platform that the State Department of Ed already has and has rolled out. And as such, I was like looking at a bunch of different school districts, just a big list, like, okay, I just want to inform them. There's one that the superintendent is like the one of 2 teachers also, and like the principal, like all these, it's like 20 kids in the school district, but the state of Idaho is saying like, look, those 20 kids matter.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, like some of them take snowmobiles to school and like some of them, like whatever it might be, but those kids matter. And we are going to have a schoolroom, even if it's a 1-room building, and we're going to have a superintendent and we're going to have somebody responsible for them. And we're going to follow these 300, 400, 500 regulations put down by the state and the federal government. We will take the responsibility and take up the charge for that kid. We are not going to hang you out to dry and say, hey, if your parents don't do it, it's none of our problem. Yeah. The emphasis is, look, for the families that want education, Idaho stands with them and stands to support them.
Yeah.
Now, we could all argue about whether they could be doing a better job. Sure.
And the answer is, of course, they could, right? I mean, in a system this big, this many kids, there's a lot of things we could do better. And we could fund the schools better too. But, we don't do the right thing for kids if they can't function in society. And they end up being a cost to the state, right? If you can't get a job, what's going to happen? You're going to be on Medicaid. You're going to be on unemployment, right? I mean, we got to make sure kids have an opportunity to be productive.
There's an angle with the education argument that always comes back to fiscal responsibility, which is like, look, you get a kid to graduate, or there are like all these markers leading up through the K through 12 process that you're like, every time you hit one of these distinct markers, you decrease probability of being incarcerated, you decrease probability of being on public assistance, you decrease probability of, not having health insurance and having some catastrophic experience that leads the state to pick up the bill. There are all of these things where it's like, listen, it's actually way cheaper in the long run if we educated the hell out of K through 12 kids, because the odds of them being a drain on our system through the corrections system or whatever it might be, those all drop like tenfold. And it's like, if you just put a little bit more money into the kid now, you won't have to take care of them from 22 to life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like any kind of like a manufacturing process, right? If you've got an issue in the manufacturing process, you want to fix that issue as early in the process as you can, because as you move through the process, fixing it gets more and more expensive. So, and listen, a kid's not a widget, so I don't want to make that comparison, but it just reinforces what you're saying, though. I mean, we could be doing so much better on early learning, right, and pre-K, and all the data shows is that those dollars spent on pre-K are going to pay off. Start them early. Get them on the right path and take care of them all the way through. Honestly, I think, given where we fund our schools, we're 49th, 48th, depending on how what the metric is. The performance of Idaho schools, I mean, our teachers are kicking butt. They're doing a great job with not a lot. And I don't think it should not take a lot more to get us to where we want to be. Honestly, anything less than having the best schools in America is just... we're just cutting ourselves short. We got to set a real bar and then set policy towards it.
Did you see the NAEP results recently?
I haven't seen those.
My gosh, Idaho for 4th grade reading and math and 8th grade reading and math, top 5 in both, top 5 in the country. And I think it was 8th grade reading and math were both like 3rd place. I did a clip on it. I had a Speaker of the House Moylan here recently. I was like, Idaho schools, they're real terrible. And these are the results. It's like, there are only 2 states higher than us in these things. And I put this clip out. It's almost like it's blasphemy to say anything positive about Idaho public education system. Like the number of people that get their daggers out and just come after me. And by the way, I put the screenshot of the results on the clip. And the number of people are like, these are lies. I'm like, okay, which part? Like, I literally just screenshotted it. Like, I told you the assessment. You can go to the website. Like, you can look all of this up. Yeah. And it's almost like a cultural rite of passage to say, like, this is really the education system is broken, irreparably broken, and like we can't do anything about it.
Well, I mean, and that's the narrative. From my perspective, at the end of the day, where do we spend most of our general fund dollars, right? Basically, 60% goes to public education. That's a huge pot of money. And there are folks out there that want to get into that pot of money. And so what do? You bash public educators. You bash teachers. You do like the bill that we had yesterday on the floor, going after the teachers union. I mean, this organization is targeting public unions nationally. But what do they do in Idaho? They target the teachers. And they come up with 60 new activities that if a teacher who is a union member engages in this, then they're doing union activities. And then you come up with a whole bunch of civil penalties, $250 for this, $1,500 for that, $2,500 if you do it twice. And so what you're doing is you're basically just targeting anyone that's a teacher who made the voluntary choice, since we're a right to work state, to be a part of the teachers union. And the objective here is just to suppress teachers' unions, the representation, the rights that teachers have to do this, and honestly, the school district's ability to work with the unions, because the unions save the districts a ton of money. And that negotiation is between the union and the district. I heard lots of my colleagues say, hey, well, you know, in my district, somebody gets 30 hours off a year or something. I'm like, okay, fine. Did you talk to the district about that? Why did the district negotiate that term with the local union? But to do this, you know, these bills that just target this category statewide, I mean, it's just more of that. Let's attack teachers and let's attack public schools.
Was that the bill that I saw something about a vote recently about preventing public dollars to be spent on teachers union activities? Was that, and again, I can't keep up with all of these, especially when I'm doing like 5 interviews a day. So I don't actually get to like ingest things. I have to learn on the spot. Like I'm learning right now. Okay. So explain this to me. So there was a bill essentially that did pass the House, correct? Passed the House that said, hey, look, HB 94, was it?
98.
So close, 4 off.
Not
Okay.
bad.
A bill that said, look, it is illegal to use public funding dollars to engage in union activities.
Yeah.
And then it outlined, you said 60 different things. That's like, this is a union. Okay. So what would an example of that be? Like what's a union activity that a teacher would engage in?
So these are the activities that you can't do because they're considered
union based or benefiting the union.
You know, and you can't support or oppose a candidate,
like a school board candidate.
Sure,
great.
Somebody nominated a P&Z, somebody serving in the legislature. You can't support or oppose a bill, a measure, a referendum, an initiative, something like that.
Sure.
And it just creates this great big long list, which is basically suppressing the rights of teachers to be able to engage in our government.
And is this publicly they can't do it? Like they're still allowed to vote, right?
If they're a teacher and a union member, and they're participating in these other activities, then they've crossed the line.
Okay. So, and again, I just want to be clear. It would seem inappropriate for somebody to be standing in their history class saying, we should vote for Representative Achilles because he's the best. Okay. That would seem inappropriate. But what if they're at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning and they are just happen to be a teacher and a union member, but they are neither of those things in this capacity in this moment at the farmer's market, and they're standing with a couple friends at a booth saying, hey, Representative Achilles, best thing since sliced bread. And somebody walks by, they're like, are you a teacher? Like, Are you, Mr. like whatever? And then they would be fined for publicly participating outside of school.
Yeah. And that, Matt, is part of the intentional ambiguity of this bill, right? It's written by an out-of-state organization. I mean, and this whole thing of saying no taxpayer dollars to teachers' unions, it's not. There are no taxpayer dollars going to teachers' union. Every dollar that goes into the union is voluntary out of that teacher's paycheck who chose to join the union. So now you get all of these ambiguous activities. Am I on the clock? Am I off the clock? Right? It's Saturday. I'm coaching the elementary school baseball team. Am I on the clock? I'm going to be scrutinized here. And this is the danger of this stuff. And I raised a bunch of issues about this bill in committee. We worked really hard. We got 29 votes against it on the House floor. But to me, the number one thing is there's a bunch of issues with this. But the one that really got me fired up was just the hypocrisy on this. So you've got this Washington state-based organization, very conservative, very libertarian. You look at their 990 tax form, they pulled in $17 million of revenue. No transparency at all about who the donors are. And they're a 501c3, which they probably shouldn't be lobbying on a bill if they're a 501c3, but let's just kind of put that aside. Assuming their donors are high income, they probably are. These guys are probably getting on the order of $6 million, maybe $7 million, on taxpayer funds because of their nonprofit status. I'm like, come on, really?
Is this
the organization is called the Freedom Foundation, and Freedom Foundation, based in Olympia, and their mission, right on their website, is to take out every public sector union. So they're starting with the teachers. They got their eyes on the firefighters, the cops, the administrators, everybody else. And, listen, these are tough jobs. And people that want to serve their communities and educate kids, we should not be taking pot shots at them. We should give them all the support they need.
I think there's a big problem in this state with a lot of things. Okay. And specifically with Californians moving here. I'll just use Californians because I'm a former Californian. I think there are a lot of problems with that. We can talk housing, we can talk economy, we can talk a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. One really big problem is that Californians don't understand Idaho. I think that's a huge issue. And by the way, when I moved here and I started looking around trying to understand, I realized there was no way for me to do it. There was no resource. I couldn't understand the politics. I couldn't understand the culture. I did not understand it. Okay. It's just flat out. And again, there was no easily accessible, like, how do I understand who Frank Church is? Right. Like, how do I understand who like I have a Representative Church come in, and I've loved my conversations with her because she was saying something the other day. She's like, this is the West. Like, we are the West. We are the Wild West. This used to be just dye your hair purple, do your thing, pull yourself up by your bootstrap, love your neighbor, but they got their thing, leave them alone. We're the West. And we're not really reflecting that now. And that, I thought about that like all weekend. I was like, God, man. Yeah. Like that, just that glimpse. It was like, okay, I would have never got that. Yeah. Right. Because California does not resemble the West. Okay. But I think there's another almost equally problematic issue, which is, although Californians don't understand Idaho, Idahoans don't understand Californians. Yeah. This is a perfect example. And I would like to expose myself a little bit and tell you about an experience I had in my original podcast that was called The Engine of Matt Todd. And I'm not telling anybody to go listen to it. It was not great. It's audio only. And I did a whole lot of like little 10-minute ridiculous like thought episodes and stuff on like, do you like ketchup? Right? Like, they're ridiculous. But I also cut my teeth. Note to self. I also really cut my teeth on interviewing people and like understanding that people were coming in ready to fight. And this was like in the heat of the pandemic, and it was a real problem. And I was trying to sit in the middle and understand. And there was this gigantic chasm in my community between parents and children who wanted to open up schools and the teachers union, whose president said, I will not support opening up schools until there are 0 cases of COVID. Yeah. Okay. And you can imagine, like, there were kids committing suicide. Like, there was this, they were ready to kill each other. Okay. So I have I convinced finally the president of the teachers union. I'm like, I'm not trying to fight with you. Like, please just come in and talk to me. And she was like, okay, fine. Like, I trust you. And I got the superintendent. Like, eventually people realized, like, okay, Matt's not out to get us. So she comes in, and throughout this conversation, which lasted about an hour and a half, at about an hour and 15 minutes, she was talking about this teacher union strike that they had recently had, how they got it resolved, all of these different things. And she kept saying that the school board was lying about the revenue that they had. And I was like, how do you mean? Like, I don't know anything about it. She's like, they had line items that they weren't telling us. I was like, what's a line item? Like, literally, at the time, I didn't know. I'm an idiot. I was then, a little less now, but still. And she eventually says they were saving $1 million a year off the books. And I was like, what was the $1 million going for? And she was like, they were just storing it up like a bank. I was like, what were they banking it for? Books. So what the teachers union was criticizing the Board of Education was doing is the Board of Education was engaging in refresh, which is, look, if we have to buy $5 million worth of textbooks, we can't take a $5 million hit in just a random year. So what we do is, over a 5-year period, we stash away, not stash, but just save up $1 million. So that $1 million was getting banked for the $5 million purchase called refresh, which is very, very common. And her criticism was, the district is not a bank. It shouldn't be saving money. That money deserved to go to the teachers, and she won it for the teachers in a one-time payment to them, and just pillaged the savings account for book refresh. Now, I am not telling you that that is anything that the teachers unions in the state of Idaho are doing. Yeah. But when you have people moving here who have had experiences like that, you have to understand, not you
There's
particular.
There's a California trauma.
There's a trauma that people here may not understand. Yeah. And the thought process behind, why would anybody support this? Why would constituents like this or whatever? you have to come back to like, okay, what have people from that state gone through that would drive them to think this is a good idea? Like, I'm not a bad person for knowing that the teachers union pillaged the book fund in my district. And by the way, it's just a fact. Like, but that leads me to have a sentiment where it's like, okay, I guess teachers unions are capable of pillaging book funds. Like, that's crazy. I think one of the great challenges is not just educating Californians about what Idaho is, but Idahoans understanding what Californians have gone through, and then meeting each other where it's like, hey, maybe our teachers unions aren't doing that. And I'm not saying they are, they aren't, maybe they're not, but I have not seen teachers unions or educators act in this state the way I saw them act in other states.
Yeah, no. And that's a great explanation, because, when I worked for Hewlett Packard, I worked at the headquarters in Palo Alto. Yeah. And I lived in the Bay Area. So I was down there for 7-8 years, something like that. And, I went through enough election cycles, and I saw what the initiative process is like in California, right? It just takes one rich dude with his, he can basically hire a committee and he can get an initiative on the ballot. It's crazy. There's no there's signatures, but the threshold is tiny.
They have an industry of signature collectors too. They just people that got nothing else going on. They just stand in front of a store all day long.
Exactly, and they're getting paid for every signature. Like, all right, that's broken. When you see a general election ballot in California with 10, 15 initiatives on it, it's nuts.
It's a train wreck.
Yeah, and that and Sacramento should be taking care of that, but here, it's one every couple of cycles.
Yeah,
right. And you got to do 6,000 or 6% of all registered voters in 18 of 35 legislative districts. Man, it is a heavy lift in this state. So when folks come in and say the initiative process is broken, I'm like, seriously? Have you seen what it's like in California? We have people are really fired up if an initiative lands on the ballot in Idaho, and we should all take that seriously.
You know what's interesting about this one? I had again, a Speaker of the House Moylan recently, and we were talking about the initiative process, and I said, look, the revision of the initiative process that's being considered right now is moving the passage from a 50% majority to a 60% majority. And my question to him was like, look,
there's actually 4 different initiatives.
Okay, you'll have to help me but
yeah.
one
that's one of them.
That's one of them. And my question was, is there any instance of a bill or initiative getting passed in between that 50 to 60% threshold that was like terrible for Idaho, and we could use as an example of like, see, 55% of people voted for this and it was really, really bad, which is why we should increase the threshold, right? And again, he was like, listen, this is not my jam. It's like, that's fine. But nobody that I've talked to right yet has produced like, oh yeah, this is the bad result that was the fallout from this thing.
Well, listen, if you think Medicaid expansion is a bad idea and caring for 90,000 part-time working Idahoans, then you'd say that that passed with 61%. So sorry, that's not a good example, but
even with that,
and to me, if you change the threshold from 50 to 60, the initiative is supposed to be a similar hurdle to what the legislature has. The legislature has a simple 50% to get a bill across the line, right? Initiative should be a simple 50%. And if you put that 60% threshold on it, dude, you just violated one person, one vote, because the no vote is worth more than the yes vote. It's like, all right. Yeah. And by the way, I spent a lot of time on Prop 1. And I was on the wrong side of Prop 1. I still believe the cause is just. Taxpayers should not have to pay for an election in which they're prohibited from participating in. And ranked choice voting is the best, fastest, cheapest way to go from 4 candidates to one with 50%. Now, all that given said, we got our asses whipped on that. So we did not communicate very well on the value of Prop 1.
When you say you're on the wrong side, I don't think you were on the wrong side. I don't think there was a losing side. Yeah, you're on the losing side. That's fine. Yeah. But like, what you just articulated, that, hey, registered, unaffiliated, or independent voters do pay for a primary process, like, that's reality. And if people don't like that, that's a thing. The other irony of ranked choice voting, which I love to point out, is that good old Gavin Newsom, he made ranked choice voting illegal in California years ago. So when the whole, like, don't Californicate Idaho, it's like, guys, he doesn't want it. If you want to do the opposite of California, you pass ranked choice voting because he made it illegal because he's a one-party state and he doesn't want to mess around with that. Now, again, I don't like. I did a ton of interviews on ranked choice voting. I had 3 for, 3 against, and 1 debate. I walked away being like, oh, I don't know what the right thing to do is. Like, I have no idea. And again, it's complex, but there are problems that cannot be reconciled, like no matter what you do.
Yeah. So I think, listen, the short version on Prop 1 is those of us in support of Prop 1, we did not communicate it very well. Right. And I think that's on us. The closed primaries, I think Idahoans agree with. The ranked choice voting, we needed to talk about that more. We needed to explain it so people could appreciate what it would mean for elections. And I think the consensus with a lot of the folks in the coalition was, let's not dwell on that. And honestly, I think that hurt us.
Maybe, man. Maybe. But listen, Representative Achilles, I really appreciate you. This has been a fantastic, real fast conversation. This time has flown by. Again, I know you have a hard stop. I'd love to have you back in. I want to pick your brain more about public policy in general. And again, I know you got to run off to teach, but thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
And again, let's get another one scheduled.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.